graduate from Art Center, but I have over 20 years experience in working with people with in a variety of jobs that I've worked sales and retail and done all these things. Um, and so I used all that experience and knowledge to build communities in video games and animation. And it wasn't until last year, at the beginning of the year of last year, I wanted to get an animation, and then the animation just took a hit. Right, everybody was like, "Hey, there's layoffs happening. Nobody can get a job. It's a struggle." And I'm up here living in the Bay Area, which is not the home of animation; it's the home of tech. And so I pivoted from animation into video games, and again, taking that 20 years experience, working all those jobs, working with people, learning how to listen, learning how to build communities, and I applied that information to build a new community in gaming. And I was able to land my first job as a concept artist, which I'm very grateful for. But I've also realized that, as I was doing all this community building, this networking, going to all these events, I realized that a lot of people had a hard time with knowing how to network or how to build a community. And so I just kind of transitioned into thinking, well, how can I help other people with networking, with community building? Because that's my passion. Is just it's kind of a it was a hobby. It's just like it was a means to an end.
Mhm.
But it became something so much more. And so I'm just really excited to be able to share my wisdom with people, and to share my insights and help other people grow their communities.
That's amazing. As I mentioned, folks, if tuned in a little bit later, you can ask questions in chat as much as you want. We are gonna take them one by one. We're gonna pick them apart and see how we can help you. So, how did the magic start? Like, how did you start networking? How was your first time networking? Were you scared? Were you excited? How was it?
Oh, it's this. We were just talking about this before we got on the air. It was nerve wracking. I mean, it's always nerve wracking to me to initiate a conversation with somebody, because there's always that fear of rejection, right? You're afraid that you're gonna say something silly, or you're gonna be judged, or you're gonna be just in flat out rejected, and I still deal with that every time I talk to somebody new. And just as much as I still deal with the anxiety of giving a talk, going on the stage, or sharing, or having a conversation, or doing something. It's always going to be terrifying. But the thing that I've learned is that we have to look past that. We have to acknowledge it. First of all, you acknowledge the anxiety. Don't brush it away. Don't shove it away. Let it have space in your mind, in your heart. Acknowledge it, and then find a way to work with it in tangent to achieve your goals of making new friends.
Is this what you were telling yourself the first time? Like, this is a place where I want to make friends. This is a place where I wanna know people. Or how did you kind of find a way to get rid of the anxiety on the moment? Do you have a special method or something? A special trick? I don't know.
I do have a special trick, and unfortunately I can't find it right now. But here, I'll give you another one. This is my lucky charm that I carry with me wherever I go. So you don't need to get like something specific. Like, this is actually a piece of an easel that I got when I was studying in France. The easel that I was using broke apart, and I just took this as a memento. But I always have like an anxiety. Sometimes I'll have an anxiety coin with me, or I'll have like, or maybe I'll meditate for 5 minutes by myself. But there really is. It's kind of like you never really get rid of it. You just learn how to work with it, and I think that's the trick. Is acknowledging that it's never really going to go away, but you have to find a way to not cope with it. I mean, you got to find a way to work with it, basically.
Hmm. And how much do you feel it took you until you got into a comfortable position? Because as you said, it's not something you get rid of right away, and it's most likely something you're gonna live with the entirety of your life, especially if you're an introvert. I don't know about you, but I'm an introvert, and crowded places are not necessarily my favorite thing all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So yeah, I mean, I'm an introvert as well. I mean, I I act like an extrovert, and I am an extrovert when I need to be, but I prefer to be alone. So I don't like crowded places as well. I get really nervous when there's too many people in the same room. But it's I guess it goes back to, I think when I was 19 years old. When I was 19 years old, I got my first job. My first wasn't my first job. I got my first sales job, and I was working with this guy in Arizona, and his name is Desmond Peartree. And I applied for this job as a sales rep. It's an account executive, and I was like, well, I don't know what that is, but I need a job, you know. And so I applied to this job, and I ended up meeting this guy and only got to work with him for 3 months. And it was a commission based job. And for anybody who's never worked commission, it's you don't get paid unless you make a sale. And so that was incredibly stressful. And I remember that entire 3 months, I would drive from Mesa, Arizona to Phoenix, Arizona, and it was a 45-minute drive. And I would drive and I'd be thinking about how do I pitch, like how do I practice selling in the car, how do I practice communicating, how do I practice listening, how do I practice all these soft skills that Desmond keeps drilling into me, because I was brand new to what being a salesman was, right? So I was no idea what that is. And I didn't last long. 3 months isn't long, but the stuff that Desmond taught me left an impact that's permeated to the rest of my life, and just kind of ignited this lifelong obsession with learning how to sell, which is really just learning how to tell a story with a pitch at the end. Let me tell you about this book and why it's so great. Let me tell you how you're going to feel when you hold this book in your hands. Okay, that'll be a cash or card, right? I'm just telling you a story. And I realized that being a salesman, and learning how to tell a story and learning how to build a relationship, they're all really aligned. It all comes down, when you break it all down, it comes down to communication skills, and it comes down to listening more than you talk, and listening with intent, and listening to make the other person that you're talking to feel like the most important person in the world. And when you do that, you start to build relationships, and you do that, here, and you, before you know it, you've got a whole community of allies that want to support you because you've supported them by listening to them, or by giving them advice when they ask for it, or by giving them a resource.
Mhm. Yeah, like that's one of the tricks, if I can call it like that, of communication. Communication doesn't necessarily mean you need to talk and talk and talk and send a message all over. It's also important to listen so you send the right message. I believe in that case, us introverts have a little bit of an advantage, because since we are afraid, or not necessarily afraid, but we are keen on observing more, we just like to listen to the other. And when the other finished, they were like, yeah, so based on what you told me, I think this, and this works.
That is like, that's beautifully put, and you're right. I recently coached somebody. I do these networking consultations, and I coached somebody on how to network. And I said, like you're an artist. The artists are actually the best at networking because of that, because they know how to listen, and listen with intent, and they know how to fabricate a story, and they know how to get a point across really clearly, because they're great communicators, because they're listeners. I mean, it's all just, it really wraps around. There's this book called Quiet, The Power of Introverts by Susan Cain. And if you read this book, I remember reading that book when I was years ago, and that book really opened my mind to understanding the power that we have as introverts, and acknowledging our skill sets that we as introverts typically don't recognize, because we're not like, we're always looking at ourselves. And I think this is a human nature thing. We look in the mirror and we see all of our faults, right? But
Hmm.
man, introverts, like, I think we kind of tend to magnify that, because we feel like, well, I can't do a talk. I can't give a pitch. I'm not the loudest person in the room, therefore I'm not valuable, right? But in reality, we do have a lot of value. We do have a lot of weight we can carry when it comes to building communities, building relationships, whether professionally or through your personal life.
Hmm. You said that the first steps were kind of these meetings with Desmond where you were, well, forced is probably a strong word, but maybe where you were taught on how to sell, how to tell a story. So if you had to start over, or if people, let's say, who never were networked again in their life, if they had to start from somewhere, how could they start? So especially, let's say, if they're introverts, if they're extroverts, I believe it comes more naturally, but how could they start so they don't get scared, they don't run away? Maybe the event is too big, maybe the event is too small. Like, what would be a good starting point for people so they don't get scared and run away and never network in their life?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm glad you bring that up because one of the pain points that I realize is that we talk a lot about social anxiety. I had my anxiety coin, um, but social anxiety is a big thing. But I would say if I were to start out again, 19 years old, the first thing I would do is I would just show up, and that's it. Like, like you go to a party and you show up, and eventually someone's going to talk to you. You're not going to talk to everybody in the room, but you're there and you have a presence. And being there in person or online or commenting on a post on LinkedIn or making content or posting on that's all showing up. And that would be the first thing I would say is just show up in any way that you feel comfortable with and use that as your starting point. And show up, maybe you go the idea that I had, I gave to a different person. This person would think was based in the UK. I said, you just show up, just go to a party, just go to an event. Like a GDC is a big conference here in North America. It's happening this March. If you're into gaming, I would recommend checking that one out. Show up, go to just one day, just walk around, talk to one person. That's all you got to do is just talk to one person, and then maybe you're tapped out. Maybe that's all you can do, and that's okay. And then go home and then contemplate and think and talk yourself through that process of how that felt to talk to that person, what kind of questions you had for yourself, how did you feel, track your feelings, and then show up and then try it again the next day if you can, or show up at the next event that you can, and take all that information that you learned from your first time doing it and then apply it again and see if you have a different result, if you can stay longer, if you can talk to two people or you can talk to three people, or you came up with a really, really good question, which is always the best when you're doing a great job at that, Constantine. You're asking really strong questions, and then just sit back and just let people talk, and then people will talk, and then you just listen, and that's how a conversation forms.
Hmm. Like, this is a thing I do and I enjoy doing, is just believing that the person I'm asking is the best person I'm asking the question, the best person that can give you an answer. Like, I truly believe that when I ask someone, they can shower me with information that I do not know, and that does wonders because somehow you set the expectations high and the other person tries to meet them, and most of the times they overcome those expectations. And I believe you bring a very solid point over here that do not overexert yourself. Don't try to talk to too many people, because I've seen some people, and I've done it myself, where, as again, especially as an introvert, if you just talk, 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 at some point your batteries are gonna run low and you need to recharge. That doesn't mean you need to run away from the event. Just sit in a quiet corner, chill, take your time, debrief, and then when you're ready, go at it again. If someone approaches you, I don't know, tell them you need a moment or something like that. You don't need to network 24/7, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, that's so I've over the past through all 2023, I went to, I want to think, 12 events. I went to Afro Animation, GDC, Lightbox, Latinx and Games Festival, just so many different events. And I learned exactly what you just said. I learned, like, because when I'm there, I have this pressure of I need to be like on it 24/7. I paid to be here. I'm on a time limit. I got to get a job. I burn out. I burn out after like day two of a day five event, or day three, and it's not sustainable. So I think it's good to recognize that we have our limits And earlier, I mentioned to track your feelings, and that's something that I found as a powerful toolkit to have is to recognize your feelings in the moment, be aware of them, and if you do that, it's kind of like tracking your do I need to eat, right? If you don't track your need to eat, and then suddenly you're really hungry, then suddenly you're really cranky and you can't think. Feelings are the same way. If you're not tracking your feelings, and then suddenly you're overwhelmed and you don't know why. I mean, your conversations. I mean, I've there's been so many times where I come home or I come to the back to the Airbnb or whatever from a long day at an event, and I'll write in my little notebook that I have with me, and I'll say, well, it was around this time that I recognized that my ability to have a conversation started to falter, and I stopped asking strong questions, and so I learned from that. So I think it's good to recognize that.
And this sometimes happens from the beginning, especially if you find someone that has lots of energy and talks real fast and you can't follow them. And they're like, you lost me, bro. But
Yeah,
probably the best thing is to tell them to slow down, bro. Chill. I cannot follow you. Maybe not the
yeah,
exact
yeah.
same words, but just tell them in a polite manner that they need to slow down because you can't follow them or something like that. And
Yeah.
regarding emotions, go ahead.
I was gonna say that something because I experienced that too when I get overwhelmed and somebody's like asks me a lot, they're telling me a lot of information, and when I reach when I reach my apex of like, oh, okay, I think I'm gonna start not paying attention. I think I should bow out. I always like to. I try to be polite about it, and I'm still working on the best wording for it because the words that we use are actually very powerful. So we got to find the right combination of words. But I like to say, well, I know that you're busy, so I'm going to let you go. And that's just my polite way of saying I'm really tired. I need to get going. Like. But you're right. It's just how do you? That's a good question. Like, how do you politely bow out of a conversation when you realize that you no longer can continue it?
Hmm. What are
That's
the
part of networking.
recommendations for the people in finding this balance of polite, but at the same time, I need to go. I'm not feeling good here.
Yeah, what was the question?
Like what are your recommendations for people, let's say, that are not already experimenting with it, like you do, and trying to find this way, like for their first time, how should they tell people that, all right, I cannot be here anymore, but in a polite way, because they just don't have the energy to continue that conversation or the attention span.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. I think this is one of those suggestions. I suggest you try it like this, but find your own way to do it. Find your own words. But I would just try to phrase and ask yourself, how would that make me feel? Like you're being empathetic to somebody else. How would that make me feel if somebody said that to me? Because I remember one time I was having a conversation with somebody at an event. This was last year, and we literally got to a point where this person said, "I gotta go," or they didn't even say that. They just kind of walked away.
Mm.
Like they walked away mid conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember thinking, did I do something wrong? Like, was it something I said, or
Mm-hmm.
so that always like kind of left with me, like it left an impact on me, thinking, what could I have done to better be aware of that conversation? Like basically, maybe I was overanalyzing, but what did I do wrong? But for you, it's for somebody who wants to know how to bow out. It's just a matter of asking yourself, how does that make me feel? Like if somebody says, well, I got to bounce or I got to go or time limit or whatever. I mean that's totally fine, but it's just finding the right words that's respectful to the conversation and to the person.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of live events, how do you realize? Do you have something that you wanted to say?
I was gonna say, and if that doesn't work, because it's hard when you're living in a bubble, and you can
Mm-hmm.
only talk to yourself, and you need a friend. I use ChatGPT to help me figure out how to phrase certain words or phrase certain sentences, and you could use that as a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
When you want to know how do I like ask ChatGPT, how do I politely leave a conversation, and it'll spit out some ideas for you.
and you don't necessarily need to follow those through and through, because
No.
it might spill out some BS, but just pick out whatever feels human, because it's an AI, it cannot write human, but you can pick
Yeah.
some ideas from there and come up with your own thing, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so, speaking of live events and talking to people, when do you realize it's not your place in that conversation? Like, from the very first few questions, when do you realize this person doesn't have something of value from me? So we kind of tie this question with, how do you bow out politely?
That's a good question because I think for me, I think everybody has something of value to say, even if they're not. I'll give you an example. I went to an event and I ran into this guy who's a sound mixer, and I don't do sound, and he does sound mixing for a completely different industry. But for me, it was still just fun to talk to him and learn about his perspective on life and how he views his career and how I can be inspired by his pursuits. And so, I mean, I see what you're saying, though. You're saying is like if you go to an event and you've got maybe 3 hours to network or to make new friends, to make those connections, it's going to help you get to the next step of your career. You don't want to waste that time, right? Because you feel like, well, I'm
Mhm.
here, I'm paying to be here, I've only got so much time, I gotta really maximize that time. But I've realized that some people are so focused on networking. I call it community building, but networking. They're so focused on networking up that they forget to network across. They forget to network with just other people who are trying to do the same thing that they're doing or trying to do something completely different, but they could still be a valuable friend or an ally. Worst case scenario, you have a conversation and you two don't click, and sometimes that happens, and you just got to feel it out. You got to go with your gut. But then best case scenario, that becomes your friend that you get to talk to for the next few years. And so that guy that I met was a sound mixer. We're not interested in the same industry, but he's become a good friend of mine. We might be doing a game jam together. It was totally unexpected. I just like, who's this guy? He's got a cool beard like me. Let's talk. Like, what's he up to? You know what I mean? Like, my thing is that everybody in the world has the potential to teach you something. You just gotta be there to be willing to listen for it. And I always think of this quote from, I think it's Socrates or Plato. Many a friendship is lost for a lack of speaking. So I just go in with a mindset of who am I going to make friends with today?
Hmm. And I believe it's especially important, at least from my perspective, because you are also getting into the gaming industry. I'm also setting my foot into the gaming industry. And what I found really important and considered really important is not just, let's say, learn from recruiters about how the process works and stuff like that, learn from people like me who are in marketing, but also learn and, as you said, network across, like learn what someone in design is doing, in UX and UI design, someone like you in art is doing, someone in sound design is doing, because eventually you're gonna come across these people, you're gonna work with these people, so you kind of need how to learn how to handle them or how to interact with them. If you don't have prior experience with them, it might be challenging.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite question to ask is what's your story? That's what I love asking somebody when I meet somebody new and they're doing something like recruiting or HR or administration or working like I was like, well, how did you get to where you are? Like what's your story? What's your career story? I'm just curious, because we're storytellers, right, Constantine? We should be
Mhm.
always, as much as we're creating our own stories, we should always be listening to and inspired by other people's stories. So what's their story? And then another favorite question that I love asking is, what's the biggest challenge that you face in your career, and how do you overcome it? Like what's a problem that you're experiencing as a sound designer, and what's the brain of a sound designer, and how does that work compared to the brain of an artist or somebody in marketing or a narrative
Mhm.
writer? You know what I mean? Like you can pull stuff from there and apply it to your field, apply it to your career field.
Mhm. Oh, one additional question I like to add when I ask people, what's your story, is what keeps you in DC field? Like, why didn't you run away already? And I just like when people's eyes just light up and you see that pure passion and they tell you exactly what keeps them there. And it's absolutely amazing to see that. And we have a
Yes.
few folks in chat. Well, just one, but hello there. CAO
Oh,
93. Do you know this person, Alejandro?
I don't know. I'd have to check the chat. What does it say?
They told us hi, so hi back to
Oh,
you. I presume you're an art person, CAO 93, since art is implied in your name. But if you tuned in a little bit later, feel free to ask Alejandro any type of question regarding networking. We're gonna tackle this type of things as we go throughout the event. But
yeah.
one,
What?
go ahead.
What? Sorry, just wanted to jump in real quick for anybody who's just maybe logging in right
Mm-hmm.
now. My whole approach is to build your community, and your network will follow. Because most people put the network first, and they think the network is transactional. The network is, I need to go to this event. I need to meet this one person who can get me this job, and I'm out, right? But my approach is, you go to an event and you meet people, and you keep an open mind, make work friends, make professional career allies. Be open to having conversations with people you would never expect before, and then be there to support them. Follow up with them on LinkedIn or email, and send them articles for stuff that you're interested in that you've talked about, or send them a job listing if they're looking for work, or if they're a recruiter and they're looking to fill a role, and you see, oh, they're looking for this role as a HR rep. I know somebody who fits exactly that profile. Let me send that. Like, do these little things to help out your community, because we're in this together, right? And as soon as you do that, it's kind of like what I said earlier about these. You have a conversation just with keeping an open mind of having that conversation, and you do that again and again and again and again, and over the course of 6 months, you've got this whole community of people who are going to support you. And as you much as you support them, they're going to want to support you in return, right? It's just this transactional mindset we have as a civilization, right? I help you. Oh, you want to help me too? That's great. Yeah, let's help each other.
Mm-hmm. And this is the thing, like that's the mindset where I go to into any type of interaction, really. Like helping people is free with advice or anything. Like it doesn't cost you anything if you know someone, if you can help them with some advice, with anything, really. Just pinpoint them to what they need, because it doesn't cost you anything and it doesn't cost them anything to help you back. Especially when I had a lot of conversation with HR people and they helped me with a lot of information. I also told them, hey, can someone like me help you out with anything? Like maybe I can pinpoint some of the candidates that you might want to hire, some stuff like that. How can I help you? Because I just feel a void if I don't give back. I don't know if it applies to other people, but to me, if I don't give back, it just feels bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to find that balance too. If you want to give, but only give, you want to give as much as you can without overwhelming yourself. But yeah, just it feels good to give back, because you asked me at the beginning of this conversation. You said, if I knew what I knew now, when I was 19, and what I know now in my age, I would love it if somebody would have told me that it's okay to have anxiety when you have a conversation with somebody. It's okay to not know how to ask a question, but just show up. Like, I didn't show up for the longest time. I was a fine artist for 10 years. So I'd be in my studio. I'd come home from work at my insurance job, and I'd be staying, 6 or 7 hours in my studio, going to bed at 2 in the morning, waking up at 7 o'clock to go to work the next day. And I wouldn't go out. I wouldn't go to any figure drawing sessions. I wouldn't go to any gallery openings. I wouldn't go to any mixers. I wouldn't go to any art fairs. And then after a course of a period of time, I was building up this skill as an artist. I knew how to draw. I knew how to paint. And I was like, well, why can't I? Like, what am I missing? I have all this skill, but I can't seem to get from here to here. And I realized after the fact was that I didn't have my community. I was so focused on just me that I didn't make enough space and I didn't create opportunities. I didn't create more opportunities for things around me. You know what I mean? So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, that's I guess that's the thing. Giving back would be it feels good to give back because the more you give back, the more you learn, and the more you give back, the more information you share, the more room you make in your brain for new information.
Mm-hmm. And mostly it feels natural because this is just my thought and my belief that in this world we're so conditioned to just look out for ourselves, just for ourselves, that we forget that there's other people around. There are people, real humans that also have feelings, also have needs, and they also want to belong to a community. They also want the feeling of belonging. So it's not just us, it's other people that want the same thing. So we shouldn't ignore
Yeah,
them as they don't ignore us.
yeah. Do
um
we have any questions in the chat?
Not at the moment, but I'm curious because we're talking about two different things. Like you can network online or you can network in person. So, what do you think are the main challenges or differences for one or the other?
Well, face to face interactions in terms of spending your time, face to face interactions are going to be the best bet. Always going to be the best bet because yeah, it's that dimensional feel of recognizing somebody in a physical space and getting to know what they, how do they talk in real life? How do they move? Like, what do they like? It's just more memorable, more of a memorable experience when you can meet somebody in person. The challenges are not everybody has that opportunity to do that because we've all got our own time constraints, work or home life, or maybe we can't get around. I live in the Bay Area, and so there's events that go on in San Francisco, and I can't always go to them because I don't have the means to do it. Sometimes it's just it costs $7 to drive from here to the Bay Area if you have to pay the toll or you got to take the BART. I mean that money adds up too. So that's a constraint, the financial constraint or time constraint. But if you can do something in person, it's always the best. It's just bang for your buck. You're going to get the most value out of that. However, with online, what you could build a relationship over the course of time by being persistent with online, but also when you share something, you provide value, you provide some form of content that's relating to your experience. So I'll give you an example. I love LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, you got to get on LinkedIn. Even if you're an artist, if you're an artist, you should get on LinkedIn and you should have an art station. But definitely LinkedIn. I love that. So what I love about LinkedIn is it's a perfect community building tool. So when somebody like let's say a recruiter, they'll post content, they'll share this story. They're putting themselves out there for you to say, "Hey, I'm sharing this story. I want to connect with you. Here's a part of who I am. Here's how I think. Here's how I work. Here's how I function. Blah blah blah. Like here's this interesting idea. What do you think?" Right? Earlier we said a sales pitch is just a story with a pitch at the end. Right? Here's the story. Here's the pitch. So somebody posts a comment, somebody posts content on LinkedIn that says, "Here's my story. What do you think?" So what you could do is you go on LinkedIn and instead of saying, "That's a cool story, Jessica," making up a name here. "That's a cool story, Jessica. Thanks for sharing." You could say, "That's a cool story, Jessica. That idea that you had about how you managed microphones in that one job that you struggled with and how it relates to your current career field reminds me of this one story where I had a similar experience and I was able to learn this piece of wisdom, and then leave that comment. Because when you leave that, you're leaving that comment, you're not saying, "Hey, that's cool, like cool trick, cool story." You're sharing a part of who you are, and you're essentially building your brand. You're showing your resume without showing your resume, right? And that's what we all want. We all want to be able to build our brand online, but you can do that effectively. But you're giving a little bit of yourself, and you're showing a little bit of who you are, and showing your value and how you think. And you do that again. All this stuff we talked about, Constantine, is I don't do it just once. You got to do it like a few times a week, a few times a month. over the course of 6 months or a year, and then gradually you build up your community. And so you do that, and then you begin to you build a reputation. You become one of these LinkedIn influencers or top advisors, or you get a badge. But all that stuff, it may not directly relate to you getting a job, but that stuff is going to make you kind of stand out just a little bit more. So just to kind of end this question, that's how I got my talks at Lightbox. I was on a panel at Lightbox last year. I didn't ask to be on a panel. They asked me because I just kept doing what I do. And what I do is build communities. And I wasn't afraid to share that. And I was vulnerable. I wasn't like, woe is me vulnerable. I said, well, I struggled with this, but here's what I learned, kind of vulnerable. Or I want to connect with you, let's connect, kind of vulnerable. And I did that over the course of only 6 months before I got a message from somebody saying, hey, it was from my former school. They said, hey, do you want to be on this panel at Lightbox? And I said, sure. They're like, you're great at networking. We'd love to share. We'd love to hear your insights. And it's like, yeah, that's great. And so, but it was consistency is going to be the one thing that I think a lot of people don't really bank on right away because they want that quick transaction. But you have to be willing to invest your time and your patience and be willing to be authentic just enough to share a little bit about who you are and know that you're giving away some information, but you're getting so much more back in return.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you mentioned it because I believe that's how I got my first gig of speaking in like gaming. Like I was approached by a few students who were doing like game design, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to talk to an event?" And I was like, "Are you talking to the guy to the left, to the right?" I know you. And I was like, "Okay." And it was in the States, like it was all streamed and that. And I was like, "I'm only doing this for 2 months, and I'm getting into an event. I must be doing something right."
Right.
Anyways, we have someone that you met at Lightbox actually in the chat.
Oh, that you did. I wish I could see that chat. Did they say anything?
Yes, they said they met you at live through LinkedIn, and they also met with you in person at Lightbox. He's the sound
Oh,
guy. He is the sound guy. Ladies and gentlemen, we found the sound guy.
okay, cool.
And we also have a question in chat from someone who's in Colombia, and they say that the industry is practically non-existing there, so it's hard for them to network online. So maybe because it feels so impersonal. So do you have some advice for them in this regard?
I do have real quick. I just want to say hi. I believe that's my friend Jonathan. Hey, Jonathan, how are you doing? Yeah, we met at Lightbox. He's a nice guy. He's the sound guy. So that's a great question because I run into that a lot. I remember another person that I met who was at my panel at Lightbox. His name is Robert. He's a brilliant writer. I don't know if you're watching the. And he had the same issue. He wanted to get into animation, and he's like, I'm in Chicago. I'm in this area, Chicago, where there's not a lot of opportunity out there for animation. Like, do you have any advice on that? And I said, yes. Like, you're actually perfect. I think it's not perfect, right? But if you don't have a resource available, like if there is no community outreach, there's no connections, there's no community there, then great. Then you make your own community. And when you do that, you become the epicenter of information because you're automatically doing the one thing that nobody else is doing. You're creating you're creating infrastructure, man. You're making roadways and buildings, and let's do a meetup here, and let's have a resource allocation set up here. And then before you know it, people talk. That's one of the fundamental rules of humanity, is that people will talk, and before you know it, you'll be the guy that's like, oh yeah, there's this one guy that I know who's doing a meetup here. You should go talk to him, and then people will start funneling information to you because you're the one that's just you're making things happen when nothing is there. And I think that's the only thing I can recommend you do is just to create your own community, create your own meetups, create a space where people can come together. And even if you can't get people, like let's say they were gaming, right, Constantine?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say they're gaming, but there's nobody there that they can meet that does gaming. But maybe there's some people who do stuff for healthcare, or like they do 3D modeling for healthcare, or they do 3D modeling for automotive, like, or they do 3D modeling as a hobby, or they do something similar. They do sculpting or something like. Invite them. Invite whoever you can who is tangentially related to your career field. The reason I say this is because you have no idea who these people know. And everybody is somebody's someone. This person that you invited who does sculpting, who's kind of interested in 3D modeling, they might have a friend who's got a friend. Hey, that's networking right there, a friend of a friend. They might have a friend of a friend who has got some sort of hookup for a job that you're interested in, and that could be your connection, right? But you don't know until you try, and at the very least, you made a new friend, right? Even at the very least, you had a 5 minute conversation with somebody new, and you learned something new about sculpting. But at its best, you made a connection that could be your conduit to getting from here to where you are to your next step in your career.
Hmm. I believe
Hopefully,
it.
that answers your question.
And if not, we're here to delve in deeper, right? Something that I see when it comes to networking in general on LinkedIn, and not only, is people don't only see in front, they don't see beyond. As you said, maybe that person is not someone that can specifically help you, but maybe they know a friend, and that friend knows a friend, and eventually you come across someone who can specifically answer to your questions, or maybe they can help you or whatnot. But unless you make that connection, it's not, nothing's gonna happen. So you need to talk first and foremost, right?
Yeah, remember there's this experience that I had when I was living in Arizona. I had some sort of a community. It was towards the end of my time as being a fine artist, and I started to recognize, oh, I should really be building a community. And I remember I got a scholarship to study in France because of Facebook, because I was consistent with posting my work for 4 years, this one project that I had, and I finished it and I posted it and I was proud of it. And I thought, whatever, I'm just going to like this fat stack of drawings. I finished this 4 year project so I can learn anatomy. And then somebody saw it and then shared it with somebody else. And this person they shared it with was the studio head of a studio here in San Carlos. And that person reached out to me and then offered me a scholarship to study in France. And it was just like, whoa, like I didn't see that coming, right? So that's just one example of, but there's so many examples out there where people say, I have a friend of a friend, and I was just like doing some work and they liked what I did and they shared it with somebody else, and before I knew it I was working for Marvel or something like that.
Nice. We've been touching the subject of building a community quite a lot, not really diving into it. So, how do you take it from purely networking, connecting with people, to actually building a community and building your community?
You have to you have to strategize your time, and I do that by learning, because you can build your community and then you can build your audience, and those are two different
Mm-hmm.
things. Building your community is your allies. These are the people that are going to support you, like my friend Jonathan in chat and the Twitch chat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but your audience is the people that can. These are the people that want to help you. Like these are the people that can get you a job. These are the people that can offer you, give you a service, or they can be the ones that will get you from here to there, right? And so, if you want to build your community, you have to strategize that time, and you could do that by doing things like. It's a really good question. Let me think about this. How do you build your community?
We're here asking the tough questions for the expert.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. So I talked about building your community, building your audience. I mean, I just talk to people. I think that's where it gets difficult for me to understand. It's like, how do you make a new friend? How do you maintain a friendship? You just talk to people. And I think that's where it can be overwhelming, because then there's like so many people you want to talk to. But what I found that works best for me is that I use Google Calendar,
Mm-hmm.
and I will write in my Google Calendar, follow up with this person in 2 weeks to see how they're doing, or send this person a thank you card, or text this person to see what they're up to, or going to an event. Let me post that on LinkedIn and let me see which of my friends are going to go to that event too, and we could just do. I can coordinate a meetup. Right
Mm-hmm.
then, right there, you're creating an opportunity to bring people together. But I think that's where it becomes like you could overthink it and you can get overwhelmed, or you could just treat it the same way that you treat any other friendship in life. You make time for it. You make time to be there for your friends when they need you. You make time to support your friends when they need you. You reshare a post when you can. You leave a comment that's insightful when you can, but you don't do it to the point where you're taking too much out of your personal time, where like you do spend all day on this and then you can't work on your portfolio, or you can't work on looking for a job. You know what I mean? So it's just a matter of finding that balance.
Mm-hmm. Something that I realize when it comes to social media is they try to make us sound more impersonal, or they make us do stuff for the sake of other to see us, for the sake to be seen instead of stuff to actually matter. So, for example, when there's an occasion like the New Year's Eve or something like that, instead of posting something, blah blah blah, or commenting or stuff, I just like to take a moment for myself and think, all right, who have I been connecting with throughout this year? Who helped me, or who did I help? And just check with them and tell them, hey, have a great new year. I am grateful for you doing this in my life, and I hope we can keep it up in the next year. So that's it. That's what I actually did. So just tell them that you genuinely care about them. That's what people want at the end of the day, not some fabricated BS. Tell them that you care.
Yeah, I mean, how do you tell somebody you care? You show up. Like goes back to the showing up has a lot of power, man. Showing up has a lot of power. But showing up by text, showing up by a letter, showing up by a message on LinkedIn, and yeah, I mean, I feel you though. There's just so many. The thing is, I never like, and this is funny. I recently made a post on LinkedIn, and I had all these photos of all these people that I met, all these new friends that I made, and old friends throughout the year, and the LinkedIn only had a 30-person tag limit on the post, and there was like 108 photos, and I couldn't tag everybody, and at one point I was like, I could just tag everybody individually. But this would be an overwhelming post, and I was overthinking it. I felt bad, but that's just that I reached a point where I recognize like that's just me being overthinking it. Like I'll just make this post and I'll text who I can, but I've only got so much time in the day, and I can't reach out as much as I would love to. Thank every single person that I met last year, like my friend Jonathan and my friend Robin and Ariel, and like I wish I could like do that, but I don't have all that. I don't have time. So you got to find that balance, and that's okay. It's like it's going back to like the social anxiety thing. When you have recognizing that you have that social anxiety when you're having a conversation, it's okay to let it exist. Like you don't have to fight it. You just got to find a way to work with it. Let it be a part of your existence, but don't overthink it. Let it be what it is, and then move on. Move on to the next thing. Because that's not that thing, that text, that post, that tag limit thing. That isn't everything, right? They're not going to hate you because you didn't text them on New Year's Eve. Like, well, they're busy, like they got lives too.
Mm-hmm. I think overthinking is a problem not only in networking but in general, because we tend to overthink, and that leads to lack of action, to non-action. So, in your case, how do you deal with overthinking so it doesn't become a wall in your way?
I write it down. I have this notebook with me. I have multiple notebooks, but this is my little mini workbook. And so, I was at the gym yesterday, and working out, and I usually get my best ideas when I'm at the gym. So I always recommend at least 30 minutes of exercise every day to get your blood flowing, get some ideas in your head. But I'll write something down. Like I'm writing down a LinkedIn post idea, and then and when I have it down, okay, let me go back and edit it, and then let me say it out loud. And does that make sense? Let me try this again. And then once it's in there in the workbook, it's cemented, and I can't overthink it anymore. because I've already got it in, I've got it something, physically that I can work with. And then, okay, I'm committed to this thing. I have this idea. Now I just got to post it. And I'm going to put it out. And this is the scariest part, right? This is like having a conversation and you say something and you're like, is that the right question? I put that out to the universe. Is that going to like be off-putting? Did I say something stupid? I remember this movie. You remember the movie Eternals, the Marvel movie? The director, she's like, well, we made the movie and we put it out into the universe, and then we just got to let it be what it is. Like whatever the audience thinks of the movie is what it is. But we're done. Like we did it. We're done. And you got to be the same way with overthinking. Like you reach a point where I have this idea, and I thought about it, and I wrote it down tangentially, physically, or I made this game, or I made this product, or I wrote a post, or I asked a question, and you just got to commit to it and recognize that whatever it is what it is, and you got to let it go, and you'll be surprised. Maybe you'll realize that the response you get was like, whoa, that was an incredible response. Like that was way more than what I expected. Or maybe it's a learning lesson. Maybe it's somebody walking away from you mid conversation, not saying anything, and you think, well, like, okay, that was. Let me get home and track that, and let me figure out what happened there. Was I, whatever the case may be, but you just got to commit to whatever it is, and commit to the result, and then learn from it.
Mm-hmm. Like, it's funny because I talked to someone about this. Like, I really needed to explain it because they only saw the word like in black and white. There's only right or wrong. But when you do something, I like to see it. Whatever the response you get for what you do is it's there to guide you. If it's not the response you wanted, maybe you need to try it the other way. If it's the response you wanted, maybe you need to go that specific way. But just see it as, I don't know, as a feedback to move forward or to find another direction. Look around you. Not necessarily it's either good or bad. Just give yourself time to play with what you do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I kind of have this deep interest in learning how and really wanting to understand why everybody has a reason for being who they are, and that's what I believe. And
What's
so
yours?
when my way of being who I am is because I grew up in a home where I didn't understand people, and communication was not something that was really emphasized, and it was just a very turbulent home. And I realized early on, I was like 9 years old when I realized that if I listened closely enough, I could learn how to de-escalate conflicts. I could literally take somebody who's steaming mad, ready to, get really intense and fight or whatever, like full grown adult. But if I listen and I didn't like react, but I just listened to what they were saying, what they're feeling, what's their body language, what's their eye movement, what's their hands doing, what's their feet doing, um, and you just like give it space and kind of mirror that response. If they're doing like this, then maybe try this. Like try to mirror their movements. Um, that I could de-escalate conflicts, and I think that's what really kind of put me on this pathway to really wanting to understand more about how people are. Why are people the way they are? But I mean, talking about black and white, the one book that I love reading that I recommend everybody read is Les Mis by Victor Hugo. And I mean, if you read that book, I'm sure there's plenty of other examples, but I love that book because in that book, it is not black and white. There's a lot of gray. That gray, that in between, tells a lot about people's motivations. Like, why does somebody like steamroll somebody else just to get a job? Like what is that person really doing? The person who wants the job, who's willing to hurt other people to get where they need to go. What is their real motivation? Is it the job or is it something else?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
why are people willing to risk their lives to help somebody else? Like what is the motivation behind that? It's not the paycheck. Is it some form of like inner hero, struggle inside? Like, what do they want to achieve? Why are people the way they are? It's just fascinating. It's a story. It's a story in itself.
Mm-hmm. I believe the first experience that I encountered in video games that tackle this is The Witcher, because in the Witcher universe, nothing is as it seems. There's always more to the story. There's shades of gray, if you will. No, somebody has a reason to do something. Nobody is inherently bad or inherently good. They have motivations.
And I think that's great about anybody in the gaming industry or animation, or even if you're just watching this and you're in a different, completely different career field. Anybody who loves a story is to recognize that story and learn from that story and learn people's motivations, and then use that when you're when you're empathizing with somebody else and trying to understand, how do I build a connection with this person? Like what stories have I read that relate to this experience, and how can I pull that apart and apply that here practically in the now to build a connection with this person so I can form my own communities, you know? So stories have incredible power in this world. Just the same way that introverts have incredible power as being great listeners.
Mm-hmm. I I kept hearing and hearing this, and it kind of stuck with me because the first way we learn anything really in this world is through stories. Like when we're kids, we're being told stories so we can understand this world through simple words, through simple phrases. And that's why they're so powerful, because they are the first tool that we encounter in terms of learning stories. So that's why we use them. That's why we love them. They're a part of us.
Yeah, I mean, as you could directly relate that to networking, to community building, to building your career. Find out what's your story when you're building your community. Maybe compartmentalize your story, your why. I always say know your why. What's your why? My why is to cultivate empathy through storytelling. That's easy for me to understand, right? But what's your why? Like, know your story, know your why, know why you want to connect with people, and have it be beyond something other than I just want to get a job in the gaming industry. Like, that's cool, but why? Like, why does this matter so much to you that you're willing to put in this time and energy and make all these sacrifices? Like, what's your why? What's your story? And learn from other people's stories and connect with other people and hear their stories. And that's how you build your community.
Mm, exactly. We are nearing the end of our little chat here. So, folks, if you have any questions, maybe you want to put them in chat right now. In the meantime, I have one of my own, and I'm curious if you had to leave the people here who have been listening or who will listen, because this one is recorded as well, with just one thought or just one idea, which one would that be?
One idea. Communication is a highly valued and not it's not that it's not recognized. It's not a really push to the top kind of skill set, but I would say if you learn how to communicate through body language, through the words you speak and how you speak them, and the words that you write when you're writing on LinkedIn or Instagram or anything, or through your drawings, through your sound, communication is it's an incredible, it's the lifeblood of our society, of our civilization. We've all learned how to communicate in our own way. Learn how I would recognize take time to recognize how you communicate and be aware of that, and then find ways to improve your communication skills if you're struggling in one way or the other. And I think that would be the biggest takeaways. Learn what your communication style is, improve it if you can, or if you feel like you need to work on it a little bit, and don't push it aside. That communication is like it's a lot, you know. It's the paperwork of society. It's how we talk to people. It's how we build a relationship. It's how we share stories. So don't devalue your ability to communicate well.
Yeah, and I really like that you encourage people to find their way of communication, because we are different. We communicate in different ways, and we don't need, for example, people don't need to communicate like you to have success. People don't need to communicate like me to have success, but they need to find that one voice that they have, that style, and capitalize on that. And it's fine. I believe the biggest thing to tell people is it's fine if you do not succeed in connecting with people, or maybe that those people did not resonate with you. It's completely fine. It's life. We don't need to like everyone, and nobody. We don't need to be liked by everyone, right? So just put yourself out there and give yourself a shot, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. Just be your be yourself. As corny as that is, it's very very true. Just be yourself, but be yourself, but be respectful. There's a balance, right? Like you
That's
don't
yeah.
be you could be yourself, but don't be a jerk. And if you don't know if you're a jerk or not, you should maybe ask your friends, "Hey, am I rough around the edges when I do this kind of thing?" And if a good friend will be honest with you and will give you feedback, and you can learn from that, and then recognize how you can improve it.
Totally. But I know that you also help people with networking and you are also teaching them. You mentioned a little bit about it in the beginning. So, how can people get in touch with you or maybe start working with you if they feel like, as you said, maybe they're a little rough around the edges, maybe then they feel a bit lost and they need some guidance? Where, how can they find you and access your help?
Yeah, thank you. So you can go to my LinkedIn, Alejandro Sandoval. I think there's only one of us. Just kidding. There's more, but we're gonna duke that one out. We're gonna duke that one out. You can go find me on LinkedIn, or you can email me, alejandrosandovalart@gmail.com. I do offer networking consultations for 30-minute session. I accept PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle, and I'd be happy to help you figure out how we can build your interpersonal skills, build your networking skills, and build your community so you can grow in your career.
Absolutely amazing. You've heard it, folks. I put the link to your LinkedIn in the chat as well so people can find you easily. And Alejandro, thank you a lot for this chat. I got a lot, especially because just a few minutes before I found out, before we started the event, I found out we have an event in our area. And I was like, oh, perfect. I learned a little bit more about networking
Yeah, go to all
just
those
before.
events, man. Great, that's great.
So thank you a lot, Alejandro, and I hope to see you around. Maybe not related to networking, but maybe related to subjects around art, because I know we talked a bit about that. Didn't settle on it just yet, but we are cooking something for you folks. That's what you need to know.
Yeah, for sure. All right, thank you so much for having me. Thanks everybody for stopping by. I appreciate it. See
Bye, folks. Don't forget that this is gonna be recorded in case you have a few friends that you want to see this. And other than that, see you next time.
you next time.